Okay.
This is David Newell. David played the character Mr. McFeely in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And I am sure he will be asking you to say speedy delivery before we finish it. Get your finger ready.
Speedy delivery.
Okay. Hope you saw how to do that, because he's counting on you to do it well at the end. Next, I'd like to introduce Hedda Sharapan. Hedda has worked for Fred Rogers Productions for 57 years. Most marriages don't last a fraction of that. So.
She started when she was 10.
Yes. And next up, the producer of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood from 1981 to the end of the Rogers Experience in 2011. Please welcome Margy Whitmer. And also a member of the neighborhood staff. She's now a Broadway producer, but worked on the show in the 90s. Please welcome Julie Saltman. So, very briefly, guys, so we can look to other stories, but very briefly, tell us how you got on the neighborhood. Julie, you want to start?
Sure. And you know what's fun about this? They don't even know the story. So I was graduating from Carnegie Mellon, and I knew that I wanted to be in the neighborhood. It was 6 blocks down the street. And I was ready to do an internship. I was ready for all of that. So I'll skip ahead 3 months. It was a 3.5-month process and to get this internship, because I was dealing with this woman who is the head of HR for WQED Pittsburgh. And no matter how many times I asked about the neighborhood, she sent me for a meeting with a different show. So I met with, you know, the marketing people and these people and whatever else, and this went on until I finally was, she finally said to me after the 6th time I had been there, she said, well then, you can go upstairs and talk to Hedda. I'm like, okay. So I'm in all black. I've got the big portfolio case that we used to carry, you know, back before there was anything digital. And I'm going upstairs, and I'm like this deer in headlights. And I walk into this office like I own the place. I mean, what was I supposed to do? So I walk in and I said, is Hedda here? And she's like, I'm Hedda. I said, oh, hi Hedda. HR said I could come talk to you. I'm really looking for an internship. And she said, oh, okay, great. And so she calls down and tells them to set up an appointment with Kathy Borland. And so I go back down and I said, okay, you know, Hedda said that I could, you know, do this. And she was like, and she rolled her eyes at me. Like, I know, I had been in her face for like 3.5 months. I did not go away. And so she said, okay, well, we'll set up an appointment for you, you know, 9 a.m. Thursday or whatever it was. I said, okay. So now I lived 12 blocks from WQED Pittsburgh, but I was still there at 8:45 in the morning, again, in black, big portfolio. I'm standing there, and the head of HR wasn't there. And so it became 9 o'clock. And at 9:15, I'm having the biggest panic attack. That was the longest 15 minutes ever, because I thought I was supposed to be meeting with somebody at 9. She finally shows up and she says, oh, I forgot to tell Kathy that you were meeting with her, and I didn't even know who Kathy was. So she writes a phone number down on a piece of paper and hands it to me and says, here, you call her, set up an appointment, and she walked away. And I had no idea who Kathy was. So I got in my car and I went to a magazine rack and bought a TV guide to figure out what time Mr. Rogers was on. And it was on, thank God, at noon that day. So I sat in black in front of my television with my VCR tape to tape the half an hour so that I could see the credits before and after to try to figure out who Kathy was before I made this phone call. So now there was Kathy, there was Catherine. I'm like, oh my God. But at the end it said art director Kathy Borland. That makes sense. So I was like, so here I am. I've got someone's home phone number. And, you know, there was no internet, there was no email, I couldn't look anybody up. So I rewound the episode just to make sure, and I watched it twice, and my then husband and friends were there going, Julie, just call. So my heart is pounding out of my chest. I call, and Kathy says hello, and I said, hi, my name is Julie. HR said to call you, and we were going to meet today. And so Kathy starts yelling in general, not at me. She's like, oh my God, she didn't even tell me, and I needed people. And I'm like, am I in trouble? And she said, can you be there at 3 o'clock? I said, yeah, I could be there at 3 o'clock. So right now it's 1:30. This was all one day. 1:30, I sat in the black dress with my portfolio until, again, 2:30 when I went back down the 12 blocks to WQED Pittsburgh. And Kathy was there, and we talked, and we might have talked for like 5 or 10 minutes, and she said, can you be here tonight at 7 in your paint clothes to paint? I said, yes, I can. And then she left. So I got home, I got back to my apartment, and I called her and like, did you get it? I'm like, well, I'm painting tonight. I don't know what that means. I don't know if I have a job. I didn't care. I absolutely did not care. So I get there that night at like 6:45, and there was nobody. I'm not gonna cry. There was nobody on set, but the set was there, and the floor wasn't painted, and it was all lit up. And I really, to this day, it's still in the top 3 most important and incredible moments of my life because I earned it. Nobody voted for it. No great, like everything I had ever really wanted. I was standing there and no one could take it. And again, I didn't know if I was an intern. I didn't care. And it turned out I was an intern for 2 weeks and then got a job. So that's how I came into the neighborhood.
Hedda, you were referenced in that story. Why don't you do next?
Okay. I think I'm going to stand because there are people in the back there. Maybe you can see better. Some of you who've been around in the last couple days may have heard this story, but I know when Rich introduced me, he said 57 years, and everybody goes, oh, wow. I actually started in children's television long before that. I had my own children's television show when I was about 11 years old. It was called The Happy Hedda Show. But it was just in front of the mirror. and I tell people, you never know where the seeds of children's play will lead them. I took some theater courses when I was growing up, but I just went on in another direction when I was in college. I grew up right outside of Pittsburgh. I went to college at Carnegie Tech, which is now Carnegie Mellon, degree in psychology when I graduated. And while I was waiting for graduate school, I had already applied to several places, Cornell, University of Minnesota, and they had big child development, child psychology places. And I sort of went around Pittsburgh looking for a job for the summer, and I just wandered over to WQED, and I said, maybe I could teach, do something on television. And they said, no, we don't have any children's programs now. This was 1965, before Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. The man who interviewed me said, if you're really interested, why don't you ask Fred for advice? At the time, Fred was working with children in part of his training of understanding child development. And he said, Hedda, if this is really what you want, children's television, what I suggest you do is that you get a master's degree, not in TV production, he didn't say that. He said, why don't you get a master's degree in child development? I hear in that the question is not, what can we produce for children? The question is, what are they bringing to us? Who are they? What makes them happy? What makes them sad? What are they worried about? He said, why don't you think about a master's degree in child development and think about doing it here at Pitt, because there's a lot of time with children, not just the classroom, textbook stuff. Made sense to me, and the second year of graduate school, I would see Fred now and then at school. In the second year of graduate school, he got funding for this thing called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and he asked if I would help. I was to be the assistant director. No, there was no staff, and there was no pay. Black and white television, was could this work? And it became the place where we all gave our heart, our life to. We were, 11 in this staff, and so you ask, 57 years, would you leave? Who would leave?
Marty, you want to go next?
Sure. I think I actually, you were talking about the Happy Hedda show, and it reminded me that what you do when you're a child, you sometimes end up doing when you're an adult. And so I remember in the summertime, I used to have these plays at my house, and Mike Gaylor and a bunch of the other kids in the neighborhood would be in the plays, and I don't know who wrote them, I don't know, and sometimes it was puppets, but I organized it. I made the tickets, I bought the candy, the parents had to come, I sold tickets, they were a quarter or something. So, but the other thing is, I used to always love to play school, and I really thought I'd end up being a third grade teacher, so that didn't quite happen. Oh, you can't hear me? Wow, okay. Anyway, you can move forward if you want, we won't bite. So, anyway, I went off to college and I got an internship at WQED, and I started out as a production assistant, and then I worked my way up to associate producer and producer for local programming. But down the hall was Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which I didn't really ever grow up with, but I saw him in the hall and stuff. So, at one point, they needed somebody to help them with a call-in show, because they were starting up in production again. They had gone out of production from 1975 to 1979. So about 1981, when they were ready to go again, they were going to do this national show for parents. It was going to be in prime time, and it was about a week of shows about school and going to school, helping kids get ready for school. So backtrack a few months. You all have watched public television. If you have, you know that there are those endless pledge drives where we ask you for money. Well, part of your job at the station is to work on those. And if you work on those, you get comp time. You don't get paid, but you get comp time. So all this comp time built up, and somebody said to I guess the staff of Mr. Rogers, if we're going to do this call-in show, you should talk to Margy, because she does a live call-in show every month. So she might be able to help us. So I took that comp time, went down the hall and worked for them. And at the end of it, I really learned more about Fred Rogers and how much he really cared about kids. It wasn't just another kids show. But then soon afterwards, I was an associate producer for one of the local producers on a program. It was a local special about Fred. I think it was like the 20th anniversary or something, that we did this half-hour documentary. So as part of my job, I drove to Latrobe, which is like 45 minutes from Pittsburgh, to his house. And I went to his house and I got to go through all of these photographs and stuff that we incorporated into the program. And so after that, it was such a wonderful experience. I remember thinking, one of those thoughts that you have that you never think will come back into your head, I thought, boy, if I could work for them, that'd be really great. So anyway, I don't know how much longer after that, a friend named Sam Newberry, who also used to work for QED, but who moved down the hall to Fred Rogers' company, which was called Family Communications, called me up and he said, "Can I have your friend Vicky's number?" And I said, "Oh yeah, what for?" And he said, "Well, we're looking for an associate producer." And so I gave him the number, and after I put the phone down, that thought came back into my mind. Wow, maybe I could work down there. So I called him back and I said, "Sam, can I get on the list to interview for the job?" And he said, "Well, you're producing a bunch of stuff now. This would be a step down." And I said, "You know what? I'm stuck in the studio. I don't get to go anywhere. I'd really like a shot at it." So he said, "Okay, sure, And so I thought I'd go down someday, sit and talk to Fred. And Sam called me the next week and he said, "If you want the job, it's yours." And I was like, "What?" I mean, that was like I didn't have an interview. So I feel very, very, very lucky. And in the meantime, my friend Vicky did not get the job, And she was disappointed because she had just quit a film that was in town, so she didn't have any work at all. But it ended up, she made a lot of money, and I worked for public television, but I think I had a better job.
David, what about you?
I think we all had the same sort of childhood. Margy with her plays, Hedda with her TV show, and you with your artwork. I did the same things. My grandfather took me to see a play when I was about 8, somewhere around there, and it was called Harvey. And after I saw this play, it was a professional play, it was a high school play. And I came home and I recreated the entire set in our basement out of whatever I could pull together, and I played all the parts myself. And that was sort of a start. It was sort of like her TV Happy Hedda show. And that was my intro into theater, and I consider television as theater too. And so I had an interest in that since I saw that play. I went to the Pittsburgh Playhouse, which had a school of the theater when I was out of high school. Instead of going to college, I went to this 2-year professional course at the Pittsburgh Playhouse, and I studied theater. It was very intensive. And during that time, I did children's theater, and I played the host of the children's theater, which was a clown named Bimbo. That was my name, Bimbo the Clown. And someone knew my interest in children's theater and in theater in general. But one summer I went to Europe, 1967, and I wanted to visit my cousin who was in the Navy, which I did. And while I was there, I got a telegram, and I think I'm going to write a book someday that's going to say it started with a telegram, because it did. I got a telegram from a person who knew Fred Rogers and who I knew, and he said, Sears Roebuck has given money to underwrite Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood nationally, and I've given your name to Fred Rogers and his producer, and here's when you meet him. And I came back to Pittsburgh, and I met Fred at the studio. And I walked in, and I've told this story so many times that you all know it, you can tell it. But I walked, but I walked into a room, we had a little conference room where Fred was interviewing people that day for the job. And the job was to work with props, costumes, and just coordinate what we needed on the show. And so I met him, and for a whole hour we talked. Nothing about my job, except he was asking me questions about, did I like to travel? I just came back from Europe, and he told me about his first travel. He studied at the seminary, and part of his study at the seminary was to spend a semester or some time in Egypt. And he told me all about that. And finally, out of the blue, he said, well, when can you start? And I said, I can start today. He said, no. You can take these scripts and then see what we need for the first week of programming and collect them, and then we'll have a production meeting, and then we'll talk about the first week of taping. So that was my intro into the neighborhood. I was thinking just a little bit, but I haven't told before that was interesting. How was that? It was something, oh, I know. Fred said, oh, in the script, that was it, in the script. That's how I got to be McFeely. Fred had the scripts, and in the delivery man, he wrote a delivery man, and it said McCurdy, Mr. McCurdy, and that was the name of the president of Sears Roebuck who gave us money for the show. So, and he said, oh, before you leave this meeting, I also want you to play the delivery man. And I said, oh, that'd be great. So I, like you walked out with a job, and I walked out with a job that I was thrilled with. I got double what I wanted. So, this won't take long. So the first day of taping came, I was in my costume, the puppets were all dressed and ready to go, and Fred got a phone call from Sears Roebuck. Mr. McCurdy was calling saying, thank you, we love the concept, good luck on your first day of taping, but please don't call the delivery man, Mr. McCurdy, because that was his name, but it was a way of Fred saying thank you for the underwriting. So Fred came back, and I could tell he was thinking about something. And he said, we've got to get you another name. They don't want you to be Mr. McCurdy. So before he even finished that sentence, he said, you're now McFeely. You're Mr. McFeely because that's his middle name. And in a way, it's a tribute to his grandfather, because Fred's name is Fred McFeely Rogers.
But you know what some children thought his name was? Mr. Big Feelings.
Either way, it works. Anyhow, that's how I got into Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And the cap of it is I was delivering an armadillo that day for the zoo. And I was taking it back after the scene was over. I turned around and said, speedy delivery, Mr. Rogers. And he said, speedy delivery, Mr. McFeely. And that's how the catchphrase started. So here I am.
We were going to sell T-shirts for maternity women
Say speedy.
that said speedy delivery. There was another phrase, I think you told about this morning, there was the phrase that, there was a song that Fred had started to write and he actually never finished it, but I said, I just love the words to it. The child is in me still, and sometimes not so still. That would be another one for the maternity.
I bet they would sell. In pink and blue.
I'm going to do a commercial break here. I just want to point out Barbara Kenny and Ruth A. Kenny from Kenny Communications. Kathy Fernandez from KHAPR. Andrea Primo here from Lonely Dog. All our sponsors and hosts making it possible not only for these folks to come and speak with us today, but also to have a place to go, and some thanks to Chick-fil-A and Panera for some meals as well. This is a not-for-profit kind of raise money thing. We don't do that. We don't make money on it. It's really community leaders coming together saying what Fred did, what Fred shared with us is so important, and we need it now more than ever. What can I do to help? And all of these people have helped with many others who you saw on our board. So thank you all for making this possible. Now let's get into some good stories. How about some good stories?
Yeah.
One of the stories I wanted David to share with you, and we have about a half an hour, so if we can get a bunch of stories in, that would be...
We have a half hour.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if this story takes a half hour, we don't get any more stories. But I do want you to share some good stuff here.
Which one do you want?
I would like to know, how did the Wicked Witch of the West end up in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood?
Oh, that's a good one.
You know Wizard of Oz? I guess you do. Well, one day I was reading the TV guide. Can you not hear me?
We can hear you.
You can't hear back there?
No, we can hear you. You can sit down.
My knee is there if I sit. I think I was, where was I? Where was I?
Wizard of Oz.
Okay. Oh, yes. I was reading the TV guide of Channel 13 in New York City, where Margaret Hamilton lived. She wrote a letter to the editor saying, I love Sesame Street, etc., but please give Mr. Rogers a big hug for me. And she watched with her grandkids. And I thought, aha. And I talked to Fred and about scary things, because a lot of people say that the Wizard of Oz, to this day, the witch still scares them. And they have these horrible memories. Some adults can't even watch it to this day because it was so scary. And Margaret Hamilton knew this. She knew that she was scaring young children. But she was directed to be that way. That was what the director wanted. So anyhow, I located her. She was touring in a musical called Little Night Music, which is, she was playing an elderly woman in the musical. So my now wife, but then a production associate, we both flew to Boston to interview her and ask her, would she really be interested in this? Because her agent said, yes, she's in Boston. I've told her you're gonna come take the scripts and get an answer. So we did. We flew right before her Saturday matinee. We were in our hotel room, showed her the scripts, And she said, I'd love to do it. Now, I hope you're coming to see the matinee.
Oops.
And we did. And she was just the most wonderful person. And she has these stories she was telling us about her years in Hollywood. She was in over 200 movies, Broadway shows, and she just a seasoned professional, but you'd never know it. She was just a sweet woman who was a total professional and loved what she saw on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And so we located her. She said, I'd love to do it. She came on the program, and I think they were wonderful segments. But one little addition to it all. After we met and were friends, she said, oh, call me Maggie. And in fact, every Sunday night she called us at home to see how we were doing. We had a talk with the Wicked Witch. But one day she heard that we had 3 kids and our second son was born. And she knew that because she called us. And to make a long story short, I'm coming to Pittsburgh, pick me up at the Pittsburgh airport, and I want to spend the afternoon with you in Pittsburgh, and I'll take me back to the airport. Which I did. I met her at the airport, took her to QED, said, well, Fred, on to our house. She sat with our son, Taylor, on our sofa, holding him, and he was 3 weeks old, I guess. I have photos of this. And, but the phone rang at our house, and our neighbor said, did I just see the Wicked Witch of the West walking down the And because she was well known then to not only for the witch, but she was doing a coffee commercial for Maxwell House Coffee, Cora, and she was well known for that. And you know, the irony to all of that is that her agent told me this, that all the movies she did, all the stage plays, all the radio shows, everything she did in her past, the commercial that lasted a minute, she did a lot of them, but they only lasted a minute, made her independently financially secure. She didn't have to do anything she didn't want to do. That's the irony, but it's a blessing to an actor who's worked all their life as a supporting character actor to get that bonus. That's almost like a thank you for sharing your talents all these many years. She was a wonderful person, but that's how she came. I've shortened it down, but that's how she came.
Wow.
If you want to see that segment, if you go to mrrogers.org, you have to spell it out, MISTERROGERS.org. Under special guests, there's Yo-Yo Ma, there's the Stomp, and there's Eric Carl, and then and what Fred was, it's wonderful. I mean, what he showed is that she was just a person. She came out just normal.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you know, but she had some of the costumes. She had the hat.
We had the hat and
the robe. And he said, you know, let's hear, how did you do that noise? I think
and she made the
taught her
cackle.
how to cackle. That she did on the program. What he wanted to help children know is that you can pretend about things. And she was just pretending. She was pretending to be.
Was it that letter that inspired Mr. Rogers to do the segment on Don't Be Scared? I mean, is that, was it the letter where she said, I watch it with my grandkids, or the?
Yes, that ultimately, I saw the letter,
Okay.
and then I asked Fred, I said, you know, I told him the whole situation. He said, oh, I know what he said. I showed him the letter, and I gave Mr. Rogers a big hug for me, and he said, if you can find Margaret Hamilton, I'll write the script. And that's when we discovered that she was touring her agent. I got a hold of her agent, and she was touring in Little Night Music. And that's how it all began. But that letter that she wrote, I would never have known that had I not read that TV Guide.
Is that how you all got ideas for some of the segments? Just,
Fred wrote the 900 scripts. He had some help with some of them, but these were his words, and he worked very carefully over and over and over and over revising the scripts to make sure. However, there was also, when we had special guests, those were not really scripted because he wanted them to be a conversation.
But they
He
were
knew we had an outline of what, but it wasn't specifically scripted. But that was his.
That whole idea of like being afraid and stuff, you know, Fred dealt with all kinds of feelings, so that wasn't the only time he talked about
Right.
being afraid, but it fit perfectly with the whole
It's
kind
like
of.
the Hulk.
And we did a similar one, and
That came from you.
we were I never forget, we were in Hawaii Fred was speaking to the International Education of Teachers, whatever that NAYC. And we were in a taxi in Hawaii going to the studio, the PBS studio in Hawaii, for Fred to tape some messages for their studio. And I was reading the paper and I saw a little article that said a child pretending to be Superman jumped off the roof of their house with a towel around his neck. And he fortunately wasn't killed, but he was severely injured. And I said, Fred, do you ever think that we could do something about the Superman? Because Superman was really big at that time. And he said, well, let me think about it. And we couldn't get the rights to Superman. The DC Comics were they just wouldn't let us happen. But Bill Bixby, who was doing promos for a show that he had at our studio, was in the Incredible Hulk. He turned into the Incredible Hulk, supposedly. And they became friends, and that's what we did. We went to the Incredible Hulk studio and watched them tape one segment, but we also showed Lou Ferrigno getting into his green makeup.
And getting out of it.
And getting out of it.
That's Fred's genius.
Yeah.
But also, he had me then later deliver the prosthetics. They had a rubber forehead for him and bigger nose, and it puffed him up somewhat. And I would bring those pieces in and say, here's what Lou wears when he's the Incredible Hulk, just to reinforce that it's pretend. And a makeup, and there's a man behind it. And then they interviewed Lou too in his dressing table. So again, breaking the scary images down.
And he asked, what do you do when you get angry? You don't throw people.
Who was that? That was a superhero.
It's interesting that both of the scary people wore green makeup. I just thought of that.
And going back to the episode where Margaret Hamilton comes on as the witch, if you watch this episode, what's really cool about it is she doesn't just come in costume. The episode starts with her sitting on Fred's porch swing, and he walks up to her and she gives him a big hug. Now, most of us are pretty much huggers these days. We really weren't like that back in that day. So that automatically sent a signal to the audience that this woman, whoever she is somebody that Fred really trusts and really likes, right? And then we find out she's the witch. And then, instead of just being made up as the witch, she puts the costume on so that Fred's able to show that this woman who I've shown love and affection to and who I trust as a good friend is actually not a scary person. She's just an actress. So,
And you can pretend to be all kinds of things, and it doesn't change who you are.
and I think the message that we all take out of this, that I've learned over the years of studying Fred and the stories that these great folks have shared with me, is that Fred was so intentional. Everything, like Hedda said, going back and reviewing and rewriting scripts, getting the wording just exactly right. And that's something that I think we can all benefit from and learn from, right? Because I think, and part of it is in our just sort of fast-paced world, we just do. We don't typically take time to strategize and say, what's the best way to do? What's the most effective way to do? And if I go this path, what is this result? I used to work for a guy in cable television, and one thing he would say when we're about to do a big deal is, if we do this deal, who gets hurt? And he wanted to contemplate whether moving forward was the right thing to do in that. So just taking a little bit more time, we talked about it a little bit in the prayer breakfast.
Just reminded me of another story. When Fred did a sabbatical in India, he was asked to be helping a group that was putting together a new television program there at their studio. And he was there watching them and trying to give them some ideas or whatever. What happened in the midst of the taping, some sound effect didn't go off. And the director or producer said, oh, that's good enough, that's okay. And Fred said, it's not good enough for the children. It has to be really, it's not good enough for the children.
He said, oh, it's just a kid's show, he said.
It's good enough, it's just a kid's show.
Yeah.
Fred said, it's not good enough for the children.
The other one thing to talk, just very quickly, he has a song called I Like You As You Are, and which is a lovely song, and it was written by, he had a co-writer way back when, a long time ago, who wrote the lyrics and he wrote the music. And her name was Josie, and she came in and said, Fred, I just did the lyrics, and the name of the song was I Like You Like You Are. And Fred said, oh, Josie, that's a lovely song, but it's not the correct English. It's catchy. We have to say, I like you as you are. And that's how particular he was with words. You know, you're sort of perpetuating, in his mind, not correct grammar. And I don't know if I would have even picked that up, but he did. And little things like that is what he did in the program. And he would stop. Well, tell about when the other day you thought he was going to not keep, you didn't look that way.
Well, but another one that happened a number of times in the studio, we'd be taping something, and even when he would do the segments in his house, even though it looked like he was just naturally talking to you, every single word was scripted. And so there was some question about how something was pronounced a number of times. And we had a telephone in the studio that would call out of the building, and I would call Carnegie Library and say, how do you pronounce this word? And then we would pronounce it. Or there was like a couple of times a plant or a bird, and we didn't really bother to check that much about if this is exactly what it was. And I remember calling the Science Museum, or the Carnegie Natural Science Museum, and saying, you know, is this how you say this bird's name? Or somebody would go with a picture of the bird to make sure we had it right. You know, just because, you know, a 4-year-old's not going to know a bird from a bird, but we wanted it to be right.
There's another side to this too, which was when we had Sylvia Earle, the marine biologist, on the program. She had a hydrophone that could help you hear the sound of fish in the water. And Fred greeted her, she came in, she went to the aquarium, and she put the hydrophone in. And we all waited, and she and Fred were standing there and watching, and there was no sound of the fish. And they started jibber jabbering, and then she said, well, maybe if you put food in, it'll make the fish move around. And no sound. And then she very wisely turned to Fred and said, well, I brought a film, and this was supposed to happen next. I brought the film that you could hear the sound of fish in the ocean. And so they turned and they put it in for the film, and that's when, you know, we edited. What was interesting to me is that in that program, even all the way through to the end, Fred never mentioned it. And I asked him afterwards, and he said, children need to know that even when adults plan things, they don't always turn out the way they hoped.
Yeah. I mean,
there's that intentional and yet that really understanding of what's important.
I think he did say something like, well, I guess it's just not going to work today. But that was it. There was no disappointment. There was just...
Heck. Oh, heck.
That was like...
Not that often. Get David out here.
Does anybody remember seeing the episode where Fred visits Coco the gorilla?
Yeah.
That's a classic. Margie, can you kind of tell us about that visit to California?
I can.
Go, Margie.
I'm not really sure how. I think they came to us and asked us, I don't remember exactly how we got the idea to do this visit to Coco. But they were very excited about having Fred to come out. But as we were planning for it, there were lots of rules. I talked to this woman named Penny who trained Coco in this kind of sign language. And so she said things like, Fred cannot look Coco in the eye. He has to not look at her. He has to be very careful. Bring lots of things with kittens on them, because at one point Coco had a kitten that I guess got hit by a car or something. But anyway, she said she likes balls, she likes red, just bring those kinds of things with you so Fred can have them with him. So we get there, what did they call it? The gorilla environment was way up in these mountains in Northern California, and it was winter there, it was pouring rain. So anyway, we get there, and so the compound where the gorillas, each of the gorillas had their own kind of hut, or it was like one of those cargo containers, but it was an environment for each one of them to have. And then the offices for this place were up on top of this mountain, so nobody was allowed to go in except Penny the trainer and her camera person and Fred. And so I was up in this office, and she said, "Look, I don't know if this is going to happen, if this is really going to work. Maybe he can be with her for 15 minutes. I don't know, but we'll see what happens." So Fred goes down with the blanket, with the kitten towel and all this stuff. And so I'm sitting up in this office, and her assistant was talking to me. I was trying to figure something out. This is when computers were really new. I thought, oh, maybe I'll just have him help me with this while Fred's down there. And so it was 15 minutes. It was 20 minutes. It was a half an hour. It was an hour. And I kept thinking, oh my God, what if she just strangled him or something? That's all I could think of is he's not back here, and I just had him killed. So anyway, they came back up, and Fred was just over the moon. He was just all over. It was so cool. He said, but because they only had one camera, and it was this guy who wasn't really a cameraman, and he was fine. He captured it, but we decided to go back the next day, and he was just, I wrote him a bunch of questions. I looked at the footage and wrote some questions, see if he could just shoot some cutaway stuff so we could make it into a piece instead of just kind of him moving around with the camera. So anyway, that didn't really work, but so usually when Fred goes to visit, we tape it like he's really visiting somebody. It's real, we edit it, but he actually is there. But because of the way it was shot, we had to kind of make it a memory. So I don't know if you remember the piece, but I remember the time I visited Coco, and we got kind of dissolved to that film. So anyway, I just was so relieved when I saw him, but I just have to say that when we were driving back that day after we were taping, Fred stunk. Whatever that gorilla aroma is, his clothes, the whole car's and it was pouring rain, but I just had to roll down the windows because it was just unbearable. I said, you need to put that in a plastic bag, just take off your suit, put it in a plastic bag. If you have something else to wear home, do, because it's going to kill you. It was a really awful smell.
Great episode, though.
Yeah, I'm sure you can find it on the internet.
Yeah, at least
sure.
clips of it, yeah.
Julie, what about you? What stories do you, David, did you want to say something first?
No, you're asking to.
I was asking
Just tell
Julie,
the story.
did you have something you wanted to add about Coco?
About Coco? No, I wasn't there for Coco.
Well, you had some
You know,
stories.
another story that you might have.
Oh my God.
Nikki involved?
Oh, right. Well, my favorite parts was when we did the Land of Make Believe, but yeah, the one that Nick was involved. We did as the art staff, and we did play pranks on Fred, which was lots of fun. But again, I was like bottom of the barrel girl, so I was honored when I got to be part of the pranks. But I am in the documentary 10 Seconds Don't Blame, moving the fish tank. And back then, when I was 20, whatever, when I was in, all my sorority sisters were still at Carnegie Mellon, and they would be like, "Oh, I want to feed Mr. Rogers fish," and I was like, no, I had no power. I was like one step up from intern. But instead of admitting that, I said, you do understand, I don't want to be the Jewish girl telling you there's no Santa Claus, but we're 25 and the show is 33 years old. Those are not 33-year-old fish. And that got me out of it for the moment. And then when the documentary came out and I was moving the fish tank, it started all over again. And you never let us feed Mr. Rogers fish. I was like, oh my God. But yeah, when we did the kitchen, when we made, he was doing breakfast, he was doing oats. And on television, you can't have a logo. So one of the things I got to be part of was like putting tape over people's clothes or, hiding logos. So of course there was the Quaker Oats guy. So Nick pulls me aside, and I'm going, I hope Kathy doesn't get mad at me, but he pulls me aside, we go up to the office and we start making photocopies of Fred's face, and we start putting them over the Quaker Oat guy's face on the things, and we put them all in the kitchen, and I'm standing next to Nick, and I'm going nowhere near Kathy, because I didn't really have permission. I'm like, I'm ready to go, it's his fault. But when Fred did the segment, he opened it and he did the whole thing, did he not notice, or is he just sort of, he didn't even realize until after we said, you did realize that was you. He's like, oh no, I didn't even realize it was.
Did you ever keep one of those?
I did not. I thought I was going to get in trouble.
I have a quick story about the fish tank. We got a letter from a father saying, my daughter is blind, and would you please say when you're going over to feed the fish, because he often just went over and fed the fish and wouldn't say anything about now it's time to feed the fish. And he said, my daughter is worried that there are some days that you don't feed the fish. And so from then on, Fred would announce, he would say, oh, now let's go over and feed the fish.
It's very cool. It's a very cool story.
But subtle things like that is what he did.
So after we finish here today, if you want to come and visit with these folks, that's great. David will be here to do selfies and autographs. And Andrea, our host, has offered to take anybody who wants to tour Lonely Dog Experience and see what it's about. It's a really incredible sort of 360 experience. And the reason that we wanted to be here today is it's also got a great story about coming together. And it really just fits so well with what Fred envisioned for the world. So afterwards, feel free to do that. I'm just going to close with any sort of lasting memory that you want to share with the group about your time with Fred. Who wants to go first?
Fred wasn't there that day, but this is mostly about Margy, and I've been dying to tell the story. On top of everything else Margy did, she also arranged charity work that we did together and the 4K through the park for breast cancer. And so everybody at WQED Pittsburgh would sign up, and she would sign us all up, and we did the walk together, and the president of QED Pittsburgh was there too. Now, it didn't matter what show you did, everybody had something that said Mr. Rogers. So I'm there with Vicki, and I'm there with Margy, and the president of QED Pittsburgh is there with his big hat on, and we get to the end, right toward right toward the finish line, and we're all holding hands, and we're crossing the finish line, and the entire press went, and there goes the neighborhood. And it was like, and it was all over TV, and it was all over, and so when people asked, I was like, yeah, we didn't just do everything for him. We did all this charity work. We did all of these things. But that was my, yes, we did everything together. And that was one of my favorite moments.
Who's next?
I'd like to hear their stories.
Yeah.
Anybody have a memory or a story they want to share or a question they want to ask?
A program you remember? A question?
I just want to say that on Instagram and TikTok, I see a lot of clips from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. A lot of people are like, "Oh, Mr. Rogers was ahead of his time." They show the clip of the African American police officer sharing the pool, the feet, the witch one, and the gorilla one keeps getting shared a lot. So I think it's just really cool that I guess a new generation is discovering it through social media.
And not only that, but Hedda drew my attention to this a few months ago. But when the Emmys ran this year, and the 75th anniversary of the Emmys, they opened it with a skit of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I mean, not just the Emmys, but a market year, the 75th anniversary, and the Neighborhood had been off the air for 20 Yeah, 23 years.
Right, they played the music, and the guy walked in as the host of the Emmys show.
Yes.
Walked in as if he was playing, pretending to be Mr. Rogers. He walked in, he took off his jacket, and then, I mean, it was just astounding. The Emmys. That Fred was the first thing of that remarkable
Major show.
It made an impact in its own soft way and supportive. I think I was there that night when they.
No, I sent it to you.
It was just this year, David. It was
Just
this
this
year.
year.
Yeah,
That's right. When we were there, when they.
Oh, you were there,
Yeah,
right.
I
David
thought
got a
right.
golden award from the Emmys
Yes.
for 50
Yeah.
years of service.
And that was. I thought that sounded familiar. They had a luncheon, and they gave some awards out, but in the evening they gave out the Emmys for best sound, et cetera, and that's where they opened up the with.
Yeah, they did on
Yeah.
the record, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
they might have shown, yeah.
Yeah.
So and
The big
but,
awards.
but what impresses me, it's just stayed in the culture. And people still refer to it, the Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Oh, just on The Sopranos.
Yes. Right.
One of the tough guys was getting a sweater, and I'm sure they set this up, a sweater out of the closet and singing Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. It's just permeated throughout the culture.
I've sworn to my family and friends and all colleagues, when I win my first Tony Award, Mr. Rogers is the first one I'm going to thank. I don't care, that's it. That's
Kathy had a
Kathy?
question.
What did Joanne think of Tom Hanks playing the role of her husband? What was your take on all that? What was shared with you?
You mean what would Fred have thought or we thought?
What did she think, and what did she think Fred would think of Tom Hanks playing?
I will just tell you honestly, it was an odd feeling for me. And some of us were in the back studio when they were filming, and I watched him go to the closet at the beginning of the program and go to get the sweater and try to zip it. If I tell you, and I think it's been written up, so I'm not telling tales out of school, it took him about 13 takes to get to sing, turn to people, and zip up, and get the zipper in right, and get it going right. But he was a wonderful guy. He was so kind to all of us.
And to
We
Pittsburgh
have
in general.
pictures, right? And Joanne spent a lot of time with him, there was a real respect for Fred, and he didn't do it as a caricature. He did it as a human.
It would have been so
And it
easy to
was-
do caricature.
Right.
And he did say of all the movies he has done, that what Hedda just described was one of the hardest things he ever had to do in a movie. Because Tom Hanks is pretty sharp, but he doesn't need 13 retakes.
Right.
But he did on that.
And I think too, for him, to slow down, to talk, I think that was part of it.
Yes, he mentioned
Try
that
and
too.
talk slowly enough to get it, but he had the rhythm right, but he didn't try and, he had his own spin on it, but it still worked, and the feeling was there.
I'll just mention quickly, Margy said we should have told him that Margy used to put soap on the zippers.
Zipper.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Soap on
the
the zipper.
So, and at one point, we got plastic zippers instead of those metal ones, because they go up easy, up and down easy.
I'm glad you didn't tell him.
But I think Tom Hanks got the essence of Fred.
Yeah.
But
And-
what did Joanne think about the portrayal?
I think.
Oh, yeah, I think-
Because
I think
she had met Tom Hanks too, and I think they had a nice relationship.
Yeah.
I think everybody was. It got very good reviews,
Yeah.
and it was. And is that the one we had a cameo in?
Yes. This is the sweater that I wore.
If you see the movie, towards the end of the movie, you'll see Margy first in a close-up, and then they pan the camera to another table, and you see Hedda, me, and
Yeah, we're right.
anyhow,
So
if you see it, watch.
anytime you see people eating in a restaurant in a movie, let me tell you, it's crazy what you have to do as a cameo. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning, it was Chinese meal.
We had Chinese all
It was
morning.
It was dinner food, and we had to pretend we were eating through all the takes, and pretend to be talking, because you couldn't really, make noise. I watch now with a very different eye when I see scenes
And so,
like that.
and then what happened is we had to take a break, and they were doing all the close-ups, the dialogue between Tom Hanks and what's his name? Matthew Reese. And so it was like we were waiting in this big room for like hours, and then we had to come back, and our plates were exactly the same. And they said, "Don't touch that food because you get. It's probably contaminated by now. It's the same food, and they didn't move our plates at all."
But whenever you see a movie, and I've been more conscious of this now, that when you see somebody just walking down the street as the main scene is going on, you'll see people doing things in the background. That's all choreographed.
Yeah.
That's not just happenstance. And there was when Tom Hanks and Matthew were sitting at a table, there was an extra that was told to start walking just as they started their dialogue. Things like that. So if you see a movie, don't watch what's happening, watch the background. That's interesting.
We've just ruined your movie.
Yes.
Sorry.
I got a million calls after the movie came out, and Julie, you were in the movie. I was like, I know I wasn't. What are you talking about? They're like, well, that last scene with the dark in the back when he's playing the piano, that girl with the ponytail, that was based on you, right? I'm like, sure. Like, I'm like, then I was allowed. I just let them believe that. That was fine.
For Margy, it was a whole different experience because there was somebody playing.
And
your
so we
role.
playing
yeah,
yourself,
she had
yeah.
like 3 lines.
And of course, if you haven't seen the documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, which is the most viewed,
The highest grossing documentary of all time.
So excited.
Yeah.
So you can still buy it.
Well, it's on Netflix
It's
right
on
now
Netflix.
for free.
Watch it for free.
It's on
And
Netflix.
we'll get residuals.
And these,
We get more of nothing.
these three are prominently in that documentary, and you can see
10 seconds, don't blink.
Julie moving the fish tank.
Yep.
As well.
Of programs or episodes that you made, I wonder what were all of your favorites?
Boy, it's like choosing your favorite.
I was just thinking.
Your favorite child.
Yeah, good question.
I think mine goes back to Margaret Hamilton. There was so much that came out of it personally for me, winding up friends with her, my wife and I. That resonates with me, but every one of them had a special meaning, at least for me, from day one.
I got to meet Bill Nye, the science guy. That was awesome.
What?
Bill Nye, the science guy.
Oh,
yeah, that was.
You like Bill Nye?
Oh, he was great. That was great.
I guess I've got a couple, because there's so many different areas, like Yo-Yo Ma. I just love the visit that Fred had with him. And of course, it's Jeff Erlinger, and I got to know Jeff over the years and his family, and the neighborhood of Make Believe, there are certain segments that just touch your heart. And we tried to, I mentioned before MrRogers.org, you will find some of those treasured moments right there.
I think for me, it was all kind of working with all of those, some of those big names was a real wonderful challenge. But I think that we did a week about mistakes, and that really resonates with me about making mistakes. That you're not a mistake. And I think also there's a scene where Betty forgets Daniel, that's a different one. Daniel asks if he's a mistake, and they do this beautiful duet that Fred wrote, and Betty sings part of it, Daniel sings part of it, and then they sing it together, and it's just so touching, and it's like nobody's a mistake, and so I think that's the one that really hits me of all of the episodes.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming out for today's lunch. Thank you again, Miss Andrea, for your hospitality. Thank you, Chick-fil-A. Thank you, Panera. Thank you, Kenny Communications. Thank you, KHA PR, and all of our great sponsors making all of this happen for us. Don't forget, we have the concert tonight. It's going to be amazing. Fred's nephew, Dan Crozier, is going to be conducting it. Fred's son, John Rogers, will be in attendance tonight. These folks will all be in attendance. And don't forget, afterwards here, you can leave your boxes on the table. We'll come around and clean that up for you. But if you want to meet with any of the folks here or get some selfies or autographs, please do.
I want to say a quick thing.
Please.
SeaWorld, another that reminded me, one of my favorite, we did a visit with Shamu, not at your SeaWorld, but there was a SeaWorld in Ohio.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful day. And but what I enjoyed, the show, they had a show then. We didn't do the show, we did, what you call it? You call it the holding pen, and the marine biologists, is that who, the people who study fish, animals, mammals, would give a little talk about the life of a whale in the pool, and that was fascinating. And that's a nice touch that SeaWorld does with Shamu. And that's how what led us to do the Shamu was that training pool, or whatever you call it. So thank you.
Yeah. Steven and his team at SeaWorld. SeaWorld does so much for conservation and animal rehabilitation that very rarely gets reported. It's not as exciting as other stories that you could put out there, but they really are great stewards of the environment and of the marine animals. So, Steve, thank you. Fred would be so proud, I'm sure, of the work that SeaWorld does for animals out there. Well, how about a round of applause for all of our friends?